You won't believe what happened in this story. It's about a boy who was humiliated, broken, and forgotten, but he never forgot. 3 years later, he returned, not as the boy they laughed at, but as someone very different. Sit back, stay with me till the end, and discover how a heart once shattered can come back seeking revenge. Trust me, you don't want to miss this.
Nobody forgets the day they were humiliated. For Daniel, it was the moment his heart was shattered in front of everyone he thought were his friends. He stood there, a gift in his trembling hands, as laughter echoed around him. That night, something inside him broke. But what no one knew was that he would carry that pain for 3 years, waiting silently for his chance to strike back. It was their final year of school. Daniel had spent weeks building up the courage to confess his feelings to Maya, the girl he had admired for as long as he could remember. He carefully saved money to buy a necklace, a token of his feelings, and practiced over and over how he would tell her. The courtyard after class seemed like the perfect place for his big moment. Daniel's friends had teased him, but they also encouraged him. Some said he was brave, others laughed behind his back, but he ignored the doubts. His heart beat faster as Maya approached, her friends following close behind. Students around them sensed something was about to happen, and soon, all eyes were fixed on Daniel. He clutched the small gift box in his hand, his palms sweating. Gathering every ounce of courage, Daniel stepped forward. His voice shook as he held out the gift and whispered, "Maya, I like you. I've liked you for years." For a brief second, silence fell across the courtyard. Time seemed to freeze, and Daniel's heart lifted with hope. But the silence didn't last. Maya glanced at her friends, smirked, and tilted her head in mockery. Her reply was sharp, cold, and cruel. "You? Don't make me laugh." The courtyard exploded with laughter. Students pointed at him, some recording with their phones, others doubling over in amusement. Daniel stood frozen, his face burning, the gift trembling in his hands. Then, as if in slow motion, the box slipped and fell, the necklace spilling onto the ground, trampled by careless feet. Daniel's throat tightened. He couldn't speak, couldn't defend himself. His vision blurred with tears as he bent to pick up the necklace, now scratched and dirty. But Maya's laughter rang louder, echoing in his ears. He straightened, turned away, and walked through the crowd of jeering classmates. His shoulders slumped, his heart shattered, and with each step, a vow began to form deep inside him. That night, Daniel sat in his small bedroom, the necklace lying broken on his desk. The laughter replayed in his head like a cruel song he couldn't silence. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white, whispering to himself that he would never forget this day. Not the humiliation. Not the betrayal. And especially not the girl who made him feel worthless. In the silence of that night, something inside Daniel shifted. He was no longer just the shy boy who wore his heart on his sleeve. He was broken, but also awakened. His tears dried, replaced by an unfamiliar fire in his chest. Revenge was not yet fully formed in his mind, but the seed had been planted, and it would grow in the shadows of his heart. The next day at school, the whispers followed him. Students pointed, laughed, and mimicked his trembling voice. His closest friends avoided him, not wanting to be associated with his shame. Even teachers seemed to notice the change in him, his eyes no longer bright, but hollow, distant. Daniel sat at the back of every class, silent, replaying the scene over and over. Maya, meanwhile, basked in the attention. She laughed about it with her friends, telling anyone who would listen how she rejected him. To her, it was just another story, another way to prove her popularity. She didn't notice Daniel watching from afar, his expression cold, his silence heavier than any words. To her, it was over. To him, it was the beginning of something darker. Days turned into weeks. Daniel stopped talking to almost everyone. His grades slipped, his smile disappeared, and his presence became ghostly. He sat alone at lunch, avoided eye contact, and spoke only when necessary. But behind that silence, his mind was alive with anger, shame, and the whisper of revenge. Each day he endured the whispers, he carved the memory deeper into his soul. By the end of that school year, Daniel was no longer the same boy. The humiliation had changed him. He carried himself differently, colder, quieter, as if walls had been built around his heart. But behind those walls, he was planning. He knew one thing for certain: time would pass, people would forget, but he never would. He would return. And when he did, everything would change. After the humiliation, Daniel's world grew quiet. Friends who once cheered him on now avoided his gaze. The laughter that had haunted him in the courtyard echoed in every hallway, even when no one was speaking. He began walking to class with his head down, books pressed to his chest, determined not to draw attention. But the silence was louder than the laughter ever was. Teachers noticed his decline, but they assumed it was just teenage mood swings. His once promising grades slipped, assignments left half done, exams failed. Daniel didn't care. At lunch, he sat in the farthest corner of the cafeteria, pushing food around on his tray, his appetite gone. He became invisible. The boy who once dared to love openly was now just a shadow among his classmates. At home, his parents grew worried. They asked questions. Why wasn't he studying? Why had he stopped smiling? What was troubling him? But Daniel never answered. He spent hours locked in his room, staring at the broken necklace on his desk. It was no longer a gift, but a reminder of failure. His parents saw only silence, but inside, Daniel was burning with anger he couldn't explain. Every night, when the house was quiet, Daniel replayed the humiliation in his mind. Maya's smirk, the laughter, the necklace falling, over and over, until his fists clenched tight. Revenge was still a distant thought, unshaped, but it whispered to him in the dark. He didn't yet know how, or when, but he knew he could never forgive. Not Maya. Not the crowd. Not himself. Months passed, but the sting never faded. For others, the courtyard scene became an old joke, something they barely remembered. But Daniel carried it like a wound that refused to heal. The seasons changed, holidays came and went, and still, the shame lingered. Each tick of the clock reminded him of the time lost to his humiliation, and the years ahead he refused to waste. By senior year, Daniel was unrecognizable. He no longer laughed, no longer joined class activities, no longer spoke unless called upon. When others signed yearbooks, his remained mostly blank. Maya thrived, surrounded by friends and admirers, while Daniel drifted further into silence. To them, he was a ghost walking the hallways, a boy who had simply given up. But inside, Daniel was not finished. Then, one day, Daniel was simply gone. His seat in class remained empty. His locker was cleaned out, as if he had never been there. Whispers spread through the school. Had he transferred, dropped out, run away? No one knew for sure. His parents kept quiet, but the truth was simple. Daniel had left, vanishing into the world beyond those school walls, leaving only questions behind. Strangely, the world moved on without him. Maya barely gave him a second thought. His classmates erased him from memory, their lives too busy to linger on the boy who once confessed in the courtyard. In just a few weeks, Daniel was forgotten. But while they forgot, he remembered everything. Every word. Every laugh. Every face. The difference was, Daniel carried those memories into his future. Far away, in a crowded city, Daniel began a new life. No one there knew him, no one knew his shame. At first, he wandered aimlessly, struggling to survive. But the city was alive, buzzing with energy, and Daniel absorbed it all. He saw wealth, ambition, and power around him, and something clicked. If he was going to heal, if he was going to strike back, he needed to transform. Daniel started small. He took odd jobs, saved every coin, and spent nights reading books he borrowed or found. He studied finance, psychology, and strategy. During the day, he worked. At night, he built himself piece by piece. He went to the gym, pushed his body until it hurt, and trained his mind until dawn. He wasn't running from his past anymore. He was building the weapon he would become. Yet, even as he pushed forward, the past clung to him. Sometimes, in the quiet of his small apartment, he still heard Maya's laughter. He saw the crowd's faces, twisted in amusement. Those ghosts haunted him, but instead of breaking him, they hardened him. Every painful memory became fuel. Every insult became a step forward. Daniel wasn't erasing the past, he was sharpening it into a blade. 3 years had begun to pass. Daniel was no longer the fragile boy in the courtyard. He had become something else entirely. Stronger, sharper, more determined. But one thing had never changed, the vow he made that night, alone in his room, staring at the broken necklace. A vow that whispered, one day he would return. And when he did, Maya would know what humiliation truly felt like. Daniel woke before dawn every morning. While the city still slept, he ran through the empty streets, his breath sharp in the cold air. He lifted weights in dim gyms, pushing until his arms shook. He studied for hours each night, reading about human behavior, business strategies, and even manipulation tactics. Pain had forged his discipline, and discipline was forging his new identity. He learned more than books could offer. Daniel observed people in cafes, on buses, at work. He studied how they lied, how they flattered, how they betrayed. He became a quiet student of power, blending in while noticing everything others overlooked. To strangers, he was just another face in the crowd. But Daniel was sharpening his mind like a blade, waiting for the perfect moment. With time, Daniel started to climb. He found opportunities in small businesses, helping them with ideas, strategies, and deals. His sharp mind impressed people who underestimated him at first. Slowly, money began to flow. He moved into a better apartment, dressed better, walked with confidence. For the first time, Daniel felt control. The boy who once crumbled under laughter was now shaping his own destiny. Yet even as he tasted success, Daniel never let go of the memory of Maya. Every achievement was measured against that day in the courtyard. Every step forward was fueled by the vow he had made. His new life wasn't just about survival, it was about becoming the kind of man who could return, not as the humiliated boy, but as the storm they never saw coming. 3 years passed. Daniel was 21 now. His body was stronger, his mind sharper, his presence commanding. Those who met him could sense it, the quiet intensity, the confidence in his gaze. He was no longer invisible. He had shaped himself into something entirely new. And yet, deep inside, he still heard the echoes of laughter, reminding him why he had done all this. One evening, Daniel stood on a rooftop overlooking the city. He realized the time had come. The training, the growth, the patience, it all led back to one place. He had not just survived, he had transformed. And now, the shadows he had lived in for 3 years would carry him back to the town where it all began. Back to the people who had forgotten him. As Daniel prepared to leave the city, he whispered a promise into the night. They won't recognize me. Not at first. But they will feel me. His voice was steady, not angry. It wasn't rage anymore, it was precision, a plan honed over years. He wasn't going back to seek closure. He was going back to rewrite the story they had forced upon him. Among his few belongings, Daniel still carried the broken necklace. It had been with him since that day, untouched, a symbol of both his weakness and his transformation. He placed it into a small box and tucked it carefully into his bag. That necklace wasn't just a reminder anymore, it was a weapon, the first piece of a story he would use to turn the tables. The train ride back was long, the countryside rolling past his window. Daniel sat silently, his reflection in the glass staring back at him. He was not the boy who had left 3 years ago. This version of Daniel carried secrets, strategies, and scars no one could see. Every mile closer to home, his anticipation grew, not with fear, but with certainty. As the train pulled into the familiar station, memories rushed back. The old streets, the smell of food stalls, the chatter of neighbors. But Daniel walked through them like a stranger. The boy who once belonged here was gone. What returned was someone different, someone who had been broken, rebuilt, and sharpened into something they would never forget. Daniel kept his presence hidden at first. He stayed in the shadows, watching from a distance. Old classmates laughed together, Maya still shone in the spotlight, life moved on without him. They didn't notice the man in the corner, the one whose gaze followed them carefully. To them, he was just a ghost in the crowd. To Daniel, this was the beginning of the end. As night fell, Daniel stood outside the school gates, now rusted and worn. He touched the iron bars, memories flooding back. The humiliation, the shame, the laughter. And then he smiled, not with sadness, but with purpose. He whispered to himself, 3 years, and now it begins. With that, Daniel disappeared into the darkness, ready to set his plan in motion. Daniel walked the streets of his hometown as if he were a stranger. The bakery, the schoolyard, the park, all unchanged, yet distant. People bustled around, unaware of the man who passed them by. Every corner held a memory, every face a reminder. But Daniel did not linger. He had not come back for nostalgia. He had returned for unfinished business. It didn't take long to see her again. Maya was at the cafe near the school, laughing with friends, her smile as radiant as ever. She looked unchanged, confident, adored, untouchable. Daniel watched from across the street, hidden in plain sight. His chest tightened, not with longing, but with something colder. He whispered, "You look the same, Maya, but I don't." To blend in, Daniel wore a mask of calm confidence. He dressed sharply, carried himself with quiet strength, and spoke little. Those who noticed him saw only a composed young man, perhaps even successful. Nobody connected him to the fragile boy who had vanished years ago. That anonymity gave him power, power to move undetected, power to strike when ready. At a reunion gathering, Daniel slipped in unnoticed. Former classmates laughed, shared stories, and clinked glasses. They spoke of college, jobs, travel, and love. But no one spoke of him. Daniel moved through the room like a ghost, listening, observing. Faces that had once laughed at him were now older, yet just as smug. He felt no fear, only a quiet satisfaction. They had forgotten. But he had not. Daniel began small. A subtle conversation here, a quiet smile there. He asked casual questions about people's lives, their struggles, their secrets. His classmates never suspected that he was piecing together information, building a map of their vulnerabilities. Every detail mattered, every careless word was stored away. The boy they once mocked was now playing a game none of them even realized had begun. Maya, as always, was the star. She spoke of her achievements, her relationship, her dreams. Everyone listened, admiring her as they always had. Daniel studied her carefully. She hadn't changed, not really. She still basked in attention, still craved admiration. But beneath her laughter, Daniel noticed the flicker of insecurity, the subtle glance at others for approval. Cracks in the perfection she worked so hard to maintain. Though Daniel didn't reveal himself, people began to notice something unsettling. A pair of eyes lingering too long. A quiet figure at the edge of the crowd. He never stayed close enough to be recognized, but his presence was felt. Like a shadow, Daniel followed the ones who once mocked him, listening, watching, waiting. They didn't know it yet, but the past was catching up. Daniel's revenge didn't start with action, it started with whispers. A misplaced word, a subtle comment dropped at the right moment. Soon, small tensions arose among old friends. Jealousies reignited, old rivalries stirred. Daniel didn't need to lift a hand. All he had to do was plant seeds of doubt, and watch as they slowly grew into cracks that split friendships apart. Through careful observation, Daniel uncovered secrets, affairs hidden, debts unpaid, lies told in confidence. He stored each one, not to use immediately, but to build leverage. Power wasn't in shouting or fighting, it was in knowing the truth others wanted hidden. And Daniel knew more than anyone suspected. Every secret was a weapon, and soon, he would begin to use them. One evening, as Maya laughed at another joke among friends, her eyes flickered across the room and landed on Daniel. For a split second, her laughter faltered. She didn't recognize him, but something about his gaze unsettled her. It was calm, piercing, and unshaken. She brushed it off quickly, but the seed had been planted. Maya had seen the shadow that had come back for her. Daniel returned to his apartment that night and wrote in his notebook. He had drawn a web of names, connections, and secrets. At the center of it sat Maya's name. Around it, the ones who had laughed with her that day. He studied the web like a predator studying prey. The storm had not yet struck, but its thunder was building, rumbling beneath the surface. Standing by the window, Daniel stared out into the night sky. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "They don't see it yet. They don't remember me. But they will." His reflection in the glass was not that of a boy anymore. It was of a man who had waited, planned, and sharpened himself into something unstoppable. The return was complete. The reckoning had only begun. Daniel remained invisible in plain sight. He wasn't rushing. Revenge wasn't about speed. He watched carefully, learning schedules, habits, and weaknesses. He was patient as the shadows he had lived in. Everyone else moved through life unaware, but Daniel was charting every detail like a chess master studying the board before the first move. One afternoon, Daniel accidentally crossed paths with an old classmate at a bookstore. They didn't recognize him at first, but his polite smile and confident voice drew them in. Within minutes, Daniel was asking subtle questions, guiding the conversation. By the end, he had gathered personal information that the classmate never intended to share. Information Daniel tucked neatly into his growing arsenal. That night, Daniel used what he learned. A message left unsigned, a rumor planted online, a secret hinted to the right ear. Within days, that old classmate found themselves caught in a storm of suspicion. They had no idea where it came from. Daniel never confronted them. He didn't need to. He simply planted the seed and let the chaos unfold on its own. For Daniel, it wasn't about the classmate. They were just the first test. He wanted to see how easily lives could be nudged, how fragile reputations really were. The result exceeded his expectations. With just a whisper, he had turned someone's world upside down. And that realization gave him a new kind of power, the power to control without ever being seen. A few days later, Daniel saw Maya again. She was leaving the cafe, phone in hand, laughing with a friend. For a brief moment, Daniel's chest tightened. The memory of humiliation stabbed at him like a blade. But he steadied himself. He reminded himself of the vow, the years of work, the shadows he had endured. Maya wasn't untouchable anymore. She was next. Daniel didn't approach her directly. Not yet. Instead, he began weaving himself into her world silently. He befriended people she knew, offered help to acquaintances she trusted. Slowly, his presence began to ripple closer to her life. Maya had no idea the man she occasionally noticed in passing was the same boy she once humiliated. Daniel wasn't just watching anymore, he was moving pieces. At a small gathering, Daniel stood quietly in the corner, his gaze steady as Maya entered the room. She laughed, hugged friends, and basked in the attention as always. But this time, her eyes flicked toward him. Something about his presence unsettled her, though she couldn't explain why. She brushed it off, but the unease lingered. Daniel's silent game was beginning to work. Meanwhile, among their circle of friends, tensions began to grow. Arguments broke out over secrets Daniel had quietly stirred into the group. Trust began to erode, suspicion lingered, and laughter didn't come as easily as before. Maya noticed the shift but couldn't trace its cause. The truth was simple. Daniel had turned their harmony into cracks, and soon, those cracks would shatter. In his apartment, Daniel opened the small box containing the broken necklace. He held it carefully, almost tenderly, before slipping it into his pocket. The necklace was no longer just a reminder, it was becoming a symbol. He planned to return it one day, not as a gift, but as a blade of memory. Maya would see it, and everything she had forgotten would come rushing back. Daniel practiced his smile in the mirror, a smile that seemed warm, approachable, even kind. But behind it was calculation, control, precision. He was preparing for the moment when Maya finally recognized him. The boy she laughed at would no longer exist. In his place stood a man who could command attention, bend people to his will, and shatter her perfect world piece by piece. That week, Maya crossed paths with Daniel again. This time, their eyes met for longer. He smiled politely, nodded, and walked past. Maya frowned, unsettled. There was something in his gaze, something familiar, something that made her uneasy. She shook it off quickly, but her heart raced. Without knowing it, Maya had felt the first shadow of the storm that was about to consume her. Back in his apartment, Daniel poured himself a glass of water and looked at the city lights outside. His reflection stared back at him, calm, patient, and hungry. He whispered, "The first move is done. The board is set." For Daniel, revenge was no longer just an idea. It was real, and it had already begun. Daniel had learned that people weren't destroyed by big blows. They were undone by the tiny threads that held their lives together. A rumor here, a secret revealed there, a carefully timed whisper. Each move was small, almost invisible. But when woven together, they created a web strong enough to trap anyone. And Daniel was now spinning that web around Maya's world. He began with one of Maya's closest friends. Daniel casually befriended her, offering help with a project, listening when she complained. He became a trusted ear. Then, slowly, he dripped poison into her trust. He hinted at Maya's jealousy, suggested Maya spoke ill behind her back. Within weeks, the friendship that once seemed unbreakable was cracking. Maya noticed the change but couldn't understand why. Next, Daniel slipped information into the right hands. An old classmate's hidden debt. Another's private affair. Each revelation caused ripples, arguments, suspicions, broken trust. And Daniel watched it all unfold from the shadows. He didn't need to push too hard. He simply placed the truth where it would hurt the most, and human nature did the rest. Maya, who once walked through life with effortless confidence, began to notice the shift. Friends who once surrounded her were distracted, distant, preoccupied with their own troubles. She still laughed, still smiled, but when she looked around, the admiration wasn't as bright as before. For the first time in years, Maya felt a flicker of doubt, a small crack in the mirror of her perfect life. Daniel never revealed himself fully. He was always nearby, always watching, but never too close. A silent figure at the edge of gatherings, a stranger passing by at the market, a polite voice in casual conversations. Maya felt his presence without realizing it. A shadow she couldn't shake, a pair of eyes she couldn't forget. The more unsettled she became, the more control Daniel gained. He introduced himself properly at last, not as Daniel, but with a new polished name, a confident persona. To everyone else, he was a successful young man who had recently moved back to town. He was charming, kind, and helpful. People welcomed him easily, not realizing they were welcoming the ghost of their past mistakes. Maya met him, smiled politely, and for a moment, thought she knew him, but couldn't place where. Daniel used his charm carefully. He offered to help with small tasks, gave advice, and appeared whenever someone needed a hand. To Maya's friends, he became a trustworthy figure. Even Maya, though cautious, began to warm to him. She felt drawn to his calm strength, his quiet confidence. But every time she looked into his eyes, something familiar flickered, a memory she couldn't quite grasp. Late one evening, Maya found herself thinking of him. Why did his gaze unsettle her? Why did his voice stir something old, something buried? She brushed the thoughts away, telling herself it was nothing. But the unease lingered like a shadow at the edge of her vision. Deep down, she knew she had seen him before. She just didn't want to remember where. Daniel, on the other hand, was patient. He didn't rush the moment of revelation. Every day that passed, every moment of trust he gained, made the eventual strike more powerful. He had waited 3 years. He could wait a little longer. Revenge wasn't about speed. It was about precision. And Daniel was preparing for the perfect cut. One night, Daniel left something at Maya's doorstep. A small box, neatly wrapped, with no name attached. Inside was the broken necklace. When Maya opened it, her heart stopped. Memories she thought buried came rushing back. The boy, the courtyard, the laughter. Her hands trembled. She looked around, but the street was empty. Somewhere in the shadows, Daniel watched her reaction with a cold, steady gaze. Maya locked the necklace away, but she couldn't shake the fear. Who had sent it? Why now? And why did she feel like someone was always watching? She tried to convince herself it was a prank, but deep down, she knew better. The past was no longer behind her. It was walking beside her, waiting for the moment she least expected. In his apartment, Daniel crossed out a name in his notebook. The first stage was complete. The friendships were fractured, the seeds of doubt planted, and Maya's confidence shaken. He leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. For the first time, She was no longer untouchable. For the first time, she was afraid. And this was only the beginning. Maya tossed in bed, unable to sleep. The necklace burned in her thoughts, each glint of the broken chain reminding her of that day she wished to forget. She sat up, clutching her blanket, and whispered to herself, "It's nothing. It's just a coincidence." But her heart didn't believe her words. Deep down, she knew. Someone out there wanted her to remember. The next morning, Maya swore she heard footsteps behind her as she walked through the school halls. She turned sharply, but the corridor was empty. The students around her carried on with their day, oblivious. Maya's breathing quickened. She shook her head, forcing a laugh. "I'm imagining things," she thought. But every step she took felt heavier, as though someone was following close behind. Her circle of friends was no longer intact. The best friend who once shared her secrets now avoided her. Another snapped at her over small misunderstandings. The laughter and attention that had once surrounded her were fading into cold silence. Maya tried to reach out, to fix things, but every effort only seemed to push them further away. For the first time, she felt what Daniel had felt years ago, loneliness. Daniel had perfected his whispers. He never lied outright. He didn't have to. All he did was raise questions. "Did you hear what Maya said about you? Do you really think she cares?" Small seeds, planted carefully, watered with doubt. Maya had built her life on the admiration of others. Now, that foundation was cracking, and she was powerless to stop it. In her moments of weakness, Daniel was there. Calm, attentive, understanding. He asked about her troubles, offered quiet reassurances. Maya didn't know why, but she found herself confiding in him, this charming new friend who had appeared out of nowhere. And yet, when she looked into his eyes, there was always that flicker of something hauntingly familiar. Something that made her shiver. Maya's grades began to slip. She forgot lines in rehearsals, missed deadlines, and stumbled during performances where she once shined. Teachers looked at her with disappointment. Friends whispered when she walked past. The confident, untouchable girl was unraveling thread by thread, and everyone could see it. Except no one knew the shadow pulling those threads from behind the curtain. One afternoon, Maya found a note slipped into her locker. It was written in messy handwriting, but the words chilled her to the bone. "I remember everything." "Do you?" She stood frozen, the paper trembling in her hands. She searched the hallway, but no one looked suspicious. She stuffed the note into her bag, her eyes darting nervously as paranoia wrapped around her like a tightening rope. Daniel watched from a distance, leaning casually against a wall. To others, he looked like just another student, unbothered and ordinary. But in his mind, he was savoring every second of Maya's collapse. The necklace, the whispers, the note, each piece was part of the puzzle he had built. And now, the picture was becoming clear. Maya, afraid and isolated, exactly where he wanted her. Later that evening, Maya confided in Daniel. She spoke about the strange gift, the note, and her growing fears. Daniel listened carefully, nodding, offering words of comfort. His voice was calm, his gaze steady. And though he played the role of the supportive friend, inside he was laughing. She was running straight into the arms of the person she feared most, and she didn't even know it. Maya began relying on him more and more. He was her anchor, the only one who seemed to understand. The irony was delicious. She trusted the very person who was dismantling her life. Daniel fed her just enough hope to keep her leaning on him, all while ensuring she sank deeper into despair. The bond was growing, but it wasn't built on trust. It was built on a lie. One night, as they walked together through the dimly lit streets, Maya glanced at him and saw it, a smile, faint and familiar. For a split second, her heart froze. A memory flashed in her mind, the boy she had humiliated years ago, standing broken in the school courtyard. Her breath caught, but when she blinked, he was just smiling kindly, as though nothing was wrong. She shook her head. "No, it can't be him." Daniel saw the flicker in her eyes, the moment of doubt. He almost revealed himself then, almost let her see the truth. But no, this wasn't the moment. Not yet. The game wasn't finished. He smiled warmly, masking the storm beneath. Soon, he told himself. Soon she would know. And when that day came, There would be no escape. One evening, as they sat together at a cafe, Daniel laughed at a joke Maya told. But in his laughter, he accidentally said her childhood nickname, the one only her closest friends knew. Maya froze, her smile fading. How do you know that name?" she asked, her voice low. Daniel blinked, masking his surprise. He shrugged and said, "Oh, I must have overheard someone use it." But Maya wasn't convinced. That nickname was buried in the past. Days later, Maya caught him staring at her in a way that made her skin crawl. It wasn't a look of admiration, it was a look of recognition. A look that carried history. When she met his eyes, he quickly glanced away, hiding the truth. But for that brief second, Maya's heart pounded with certainty. He knows me. He's hiding something. Maya began asking questions. Where had he grown up? Why did he move back here? His answers were smooth, polished, but too rehearsed. She noticed the small hesitations, the way he avoided certain details. Still, every time doubt crept in, Daniel countered with charm, with kindness, with perfectly timed gestures. Maya's mind told her not to trust him, but her heart wanted to believe. One afternoon, Maya was cleaning out her desk when she found an old school photo, her class, 3 years ago. She stared at the faces, laughing children frozen in time. And there he was, the boy she had humiliated. His eyes downcast, his shoulders slumped. She felt a pang of guilt she had long buried. But as she studied the photo, she gasped. His eyes. They were the same eyes she saw every day now. Maya shoved the photo back into the drawer, her hands trembling. She didn't want to believe it. It couldn't be him. He was gone. He had disappeared. But her gut screamed the truth she refused to accept. The charming stranger who had become her confidant was the boy she had once destroyed. And if that was true, then everything was a lie. Meanwhile, Daniel knew she was close. He could see the suspicion in her eyes, the way she hesitated around him now. And he savored it. He wanted her to doubt, to fear, to realize the walls were closing in. But he wasn't ready for the grand reveal. Not yet. He wanted her broken first. He wanted her desperate for the truth. One night, Maya left a gathering late. As she walked down a dark alley toward her home, she felt the weight of footsteps behind her. Her pulse raced. She turned and saw Daniel. His face half hidden in the shadows, his eyes unblinking. For a moment, he didn't speak, didn't move. Just stared. Then, with a smile too calm for the moment, he said, "I was just making sure you got home safe." Maya forced a shaky laugh, but her heart screamed otherwise. That night, she dreamed of him, not the man she knew now, but the boy she had humiliated. She dreamed of his tear-streaked face, the necklace falling to the ground, the laughter of her friends echoing like knives in the air. She woke in a cold sweat, whispering, "No, it can't be him. It can't." But deep inside, she already knew the answer. The next day, Daniel slipped again. He mentioned something about a teacher Maya had in her first year, something he should have had no way of knowing. Maya's heart skipped. She studied him closely, and for the briefest second, the mask slipped. His smile faltered, his eyes hardened. And in that instant, she saw it, the boy he once was, glaring at her from behind the man he had become. Maya staggered back, shaken. She wanted to confront him, to demand the truth. But the fear of what she might hear kept her silent. Instead, she plastered on a smile, pretending everything was fine. Yet, her mind was racing. If he really was that boy, then what did he want from her now? And why had he come back into her life after all these years? Daniel walked her home that evening, speaking lightly of meaningless things. But behind his calm demeanor, he was celebrating. The cracks were showing. Maya was doubting, unraveling, questioning. The fear was building exactly as he had planned. And soon, he thought, she would be forced to face the truth. As she closed the door behind her, Maya leaned against it, breathing hard. The house felt colder than usual, the silence pressing against her ears. She clutched her chest, whispering to herself, "If it's really him, then I don't know what he'll do to me." Outside, in the shadows, Daniel watched her window, a faint smile curving his lips. The game was reaching its next stage. Maya's days turned restless, her nights sleepless. Every time she saw him, her chest tightened. Every word, every glance felt loaded with meaning she couldn't decipher. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the fear of being right held her back. The charming stranger was no stranger at all. Her heart already knew it. Then, the accidents began. Her bike chain snapped while she was riding. Her presentation notes went missing before a big event. Anonymous messages appeared on her phone, each one vague, but unsettling. "It's almost time." Maya grew paranoid, jumping at shadows, scanning every face around her. And always, Daniel was there. Calm, supportive, the only one she thought she could lean on. She poured her fears into him late one night, her voice trembling. "Someone's trying to mess with me," she whispered. "I don't know who, but they won't stop." Daniel listened silently, his eyes locked on hers. For a moment, she thought she saw pity in his gaze, but beneath it, something darker burned. He assured her she wasn't alone. And she believed him, not realizing the truth. She was lying in the spider's web, speaking to the spider itself. Maya's family noticed her decline. Her parents asked what was wrong, but she brushed it off with forced smiles. She couldn't tell them, not yet. Even if she tried, what would she say? That a boy she humiliated years ago had returned, hidden in plain sight? That he might be the one tormenting her now? It sounded insane. And maybe that's what he wanted, for her to feel insane. Daniel's manipulations grew bolder. A rumor spread about Maya cheating on a test. A private photo from her phone circulated mysteriously. Everywhere she turned, people whispered, judged, pulled away. The life she had built on admiration and pride was crumbling. And through it all, Daniel remained close, offering comfort, smiling faintly as her world collapsed around her. One evening, she found another box at her door. This time, inside was a folded note, and taped to it, her old school ID card, scratched and worn. Her name, her picture, next to his, from the same year. Her hands shook violently as she read the words written on the paper. "Did you really think I'd forget?" Maya dropped the note, her knees buckling. She couldn't deny it any longer. It was him. She tried to avoid him after that, making excuses, slipping away whenever he appeared. But he was always there, waiting outside class, walking the same streets, showing up at the same places. His presence was inescapable. And the more she ran, the more certain she became. He wanted her to know. He wanted her cornered. One night, Maya broke down in her room, clutching the necklace and the photo. Tears streamed down her face. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why won't he just leave me alone?" But deep inside, she knew why. This was punishment. Retribution. A debt she thought forgotten had come back to be paid in full. From the shadows outside her window, Daniel watched her silhouette crumple on the floor. He could almost hear her sobs through the glass. He clenched his fist, his jaw tight. This was the moment he had waited for, the moment she finally felt what he had felt years ago. But still, he held back. The reveal had to be perfect. The final strike had to cut the deepest. The next day, he nearly told her. They sat under a tree, silence stretching between them. She looked at him with desperate eyes and whispered, "Why do I feel like I've known you forever?" Daniel's lips parted, the truth ready to spill. But then he stopped, forcing a smile instead. "Maybe some souls are just meant to cross paths," he said softly. Maya tried to smile back, but unease churned in her stomach. Daniel's patience was wearing thin. He had chipped away at her confidence, shattered her friendships, planted fear in her heart. All that remained was the reveal, the final act. Soon, she would know exactly who he was. Soon, she would face the boy she had broken. And when that moment came, there would be no escape from the truth. As Maya walked home that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was leading to something. A moment she couldn't avoid. A truth waiting just ahead. She clutched the necklace in her pocket, her steps quickening. In the distance, Daniel followed silently, his shadow stretching across the pavement. The past and present were about to collide. Daniel had chosen the night carefully. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with silence. Maya was walking home alone, her mind restless, her heart racing. She didn't know why, but she could feel it. The storm was about to break. And Daniel, hidden in the shadows, was ready to step into the light. Maya's footsteps echoed against the pavement. She clutched her bag tighter, sensing something behind her. She turned, and there he was. Daniel stood in the middle of the street, his face calm, his eyes unblinking. For the first time, he didn't smile. He didn't pretend. He simply watched her, his silence louder than any words. She tried to speak, but her throat closed. In his gaze, she finally saw it, the boy she had laughed at, the boy she had humiliated, the boy who had disappeared. The years had changed him, sharpened him, but the eyes were the same. Her heart dropped. "It's you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel stepped closer, and the shadows seemed to follow him. "Did you really think I'd forget?" His voice was low, steady, but filled with weight. Maya stumbled back, shaking her head. I didn't mean to. It was just a joke." But Daniel cut her off with a bitter laugh. "A joke? You ruined me. You laughed while I fell apart. And you thought time would erase it? No, Maya. Time only sharpened it." Maya's legs weakened. She raised her hands as if to shield herself, her voice breaking. "Please. I was young, stupid. I didn't know what I was doing. I never thought." Her words trailed off as Daniel's expression darkened. "You never thought." "Exactly. And now, you will." The weight of his words crushed her. This wasn't just anger, it was years of pain, sculpted into vengeance. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the broken necklace. He held it in his hand, the silver glinting under the streetlight. "Do you remember this?" he asked. Maya's eyes widened, tears spilling down her cheeks. She nodded shakily. "I never forgot," he whispered, his voice laced with venom. "Every night, I remembered. And now, so will you." He dropped the necklace at her feet. Maya crumpled to her knees, staring at the necklace as if it were a curse. The truth was undeniable. The stranger she trusted, the man she leaned on, had been her victim all along. And now, he stood above her, no longer broken, but powerful. She sobbed. "What do you want from me?" Daniel's answer was cold. "I want you to feel what I felt." He crouched down, his face inches from hers. "Alone. Small. Afraid. That's what you gave me, Maya. And that's what I've given back." His eyes burned with intensity. For the first time, she saw the full depth of the boy she had destroyed. The pain, the loneliness, the scars. She wanted to reach out, to beg forgiveness, but his stare froze her in place. "Daniel, please," she whispered, finally calling him by name. The sound of it seemed to pierce the air. For a moment, his expression softened. For a moment, she thought there was still humanity left in him. But then he stood tall, his shadow stretching over her. "It's too late for please. Too late for sorry. The past can't be erased." The night grew colder, the silence unbearable. Maya knelt on the ground, trembling, the necklace clutched in her hand. Daniel looked down at her, his jaw tight, his heart torn between triumph and emptiness. This was the moment he had dreamed of, yet it didn't feel the way he imagined. Revenge had been his fuel, but now that it was real, the fire burned differently. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low and sharp. "This isn't the end, Maya. It's only the beginning. Every day, every breath, you'll remember me. You'll never escape what you did." Maya sobbed, her body shaking. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't move. His words had chained her to the ground more than his hands ever could. Then, without another word, Daniel turned and walked into the shadows, leaving her broken on the empty street. Maya clutched the necklace to her chest, her tears falling onto the pavement. She had destroyed a boy, and in return, he had destroyed her world. The night swallowed him whole, and for the first time, Maya realized her past would haunt her forever.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more real tales.